Hello, Ms. Holgerman. My name is Raiza, and today my partner and I, Skyler, will be discussing the genetic disorder of ichthyosis. In the mid-1700s, English astronomer John Mackett had introduced the first case of scaly skin and rough patches that occupied the spaces in a person's body. This started the evolution of how ichthyosis has come to be acknowledged today. But how exactly does ichthyosis happen? Given that there are many variations of ichthyosis, there are also many different causes to how this comes to show up in organisms. Causes can be linked to a frame shift deletion, which is where a deleted letter on a codon sequence leads to the codon coding for incorrect amino acids and proteins. And this frame shift deletion is on the chromosome X, a sex-linked chromosome. It can also be caused by a frame shift insertion on the chromosome 14 with the gene filigrin, or it can be caused by underlying conditions such as long-term kidney failure, certain cancers, sarcoidosis, infections like HIV and leprosy, medicines and vitamins like cimetidine, clofazimine, and nicotinic acid, which can all trigger ichthyosis in the later years instead of at birth. So how do these mutations affect the organisms at a cellular level? Both genes, steroid sulfatase and filigrin, code for proteins that help strengthen our endoplasmic reticulum, or the barrier of our skin. However, with ichthyosis, the mutation causes the gene to not produce as many of these proteins, resulting in the dead skin cells building up and our skin having characteristics of unnecessary thickness. Speaking of the physical traits, here's Skyler on the details of the ichthyosis phenotype. Cheers!
Thank you. Now, as Raiza has mentioned, despite its many different variants, those being either harlequin ichthyosis or ichthyosis vulgaris, etc., most have relatively the same phenotypes or physical attributes, those being immensely dry, scaly, rough, and thick skin, as it's being the most prominent, or some of the other side effects being blistered skin, thin yellow or shiny layers of skin that eventually come off. Now, as I had stated before, and as you can see, the skin of the crust of the bread is severely different than that of the normal bread. This can be interpreted as a mutation in a gene, as one had an increase of sorts in their genome. As for the normal one, we can observe a more delicate touch. We can also see parts of the skin flaking off of the body. Keep in mind that this experiment is without any foul play, as that it just removed each subject lightly from its holdings. So this flaking of itself is more of the mutation.
For mode of inheritance, although there are some exceptions, most cases of ichthyosis are formed by autosomal recessive inheritance. This means that the disease, although it can be, isn't typically located on a sex chromosome provided by a mother or father, but is on the other 22 pairs of chromosomes that we have. And by autosomal, we mean that it is in our bodily functions, not our reproductive functions. And with dominant and recessive traits, they are usually depicted by one dominant allele needing to be present for it to have dominance or priority over a recessive trait, whereas a recessive trait needs two recessive alleles, or lowercase letters, for that trait to be shown up, and that is the case for ichthyosis. In the following Punnett squares, we see the variation of crosses and probability of ichthyosis. We have 25%, 0%, 50%, and 100% probability of ichthyosis.
Though the diagnosis of ichthyosis is much less complicated to spot, as from birth, doctors can examine the baby for thick, rough, and/or scaly skin, although it must be tested further through biopsies, looking for the mutated gene extracted to use at later time to test for mutations, or in this case, ichthyosis. And a much more severe form of ichthyosis, harlequin ichthyosis, the mutated gene ABCA12, being homozygous recessive, is recessive to that of the dominant gene, which would then code for normal skin. This leads people to mix up ichthyosis and other skin conditions, which have similar symptoms, wasting time and resources that could have been used for better uses. However, as Raiza might have mentioned, only about 16,000 babies are born with this disease, with around 140 million being born every year. These accusations rarely help.
With the population affected, any gender or race can be affected by ichthyosis, but with the varying ages, more are susceptible to getting the disease. The frequency of the filigrin mutation is about 8 to 10% of the general population. And each year, 300 out of 1,600 babies are born with a moderate to severe form of ichthyosis. The disease is usually present at birth, the first year, and continues to affect the patient's life. And lastly, acquired ichthyosis presents itself in adulthood. Doctors don't know why this happens, but usually patients with this have underlying conditions. With this, there is a 1 to 250 ratio of getting ichthyosis through acquired ichthyosis. Even though symptoms are mild, the mortality rate is 50% for this disease, and it is mostly children. So how can we better these conditions?
This disorder can take measures to better the conditions on a day-to-day basis. This includes creams, lotions, ointments, usually after long baths, to help soothe the skin and loosen the scales. To make sure the disorder declines your health at a slower rate, people can visit all sorts of doctors to help deal with some of the other symptoms.
How to cure advancements like what Dr. Keith showed, discovering that through genetics, the reason for ichthyosis is a rare subtype, and Accutane, a treatment for acne, ruling out the possibility of any ichthyosis. Additionally, Dr. Amy Pollard found that the Th17 pathway, an arm for the immune system, is abnormally mobile compared to the average human. She's created a new drug specific to that pathway, improving the circumstances of the disorder. Finally, one thing Skyler and I can take away is that with the information we've obtained, we will continue to dive and connect this groundbreaking information to the future ahead. That's all from us. Thank you for watching.